Hello, viewers. Patrick Lawrence again. Thank you once again for coming along. Before I go any further, I have to note it's December 22nd. I just figured that out as I was making my notes. I bring that up because we are going to spend some time with a very distinguished guest. Oliver Stone has come out with a new film, and it's called JFK Revisited, the subtitle Through the Looking Glass. I don't think I really need to introduce Oliver very elaborately, but just to note a few things: 4 Academy Awards, including Best Adapted Screenplay and then Best Film Director and so on. Um, 3 films on Vietnam. I want to note among the many: Platoon, 87, Born on the 4th of July, 89, Heaven and Earth, 93, and in the middle in 1991, JFK. Uh, and This one, I'm going to call it a diptych, if I may, a sequel, I suppose, in Hollywood speak. Um, Welcome, Oliver. Thank you very much for giving us some of your time.
Thank you, Patrick. It's a pleasure to be here. It's my first time.
Yeah. The new film, how did we've got 30 years between JFK and JFK Revisited. I just saw it the other night. I should mention to listeners, if you want to see it, I saw it by way of Showtime. If there are other ways to see it, maybe Oliver can let us know about them. How did you come to return to the topic and make the film? What were you after?
Well, this is 30 years have gone by, and the film created a stir, quite a stir, and it led to an act of Congress, actually, which created the JFK Records Act and the Assassination Records Review Board to investigate, declassify the files that had been held apparently until 2029 had been classified by the House Select Committee on Investigations, which was the second investigation. They classify a lot of stuff. None of it's been seen. So people wanted to know, and when they saw my film, they were very moved, and there was a lot of outcry. They passed this act, and the board operated for 4 years, from 94 to 98, and did some good work. They were academics, and they obviously were up against some tough customers in the CIA who didn't give them much. They stonewalled them pretty well, but they were very, they had good people working for them, some expert technicians who asked the right questions. And a lot came out, none of it reported. I think the only thing that was reported was Operation Northwoods, which was a big scandal at the time, that the Pentagon had a false flag operation called Northwoods to invade, basically set up to invade Cuba. Kennedy had never approved it.
It figures in the new film, doesn't it?
It figures in the new film because there's a lot of false flags, but yeah. The new film is trying to put together this information in a coherent way for the public to understand. The 2-hour version is perhaps the easiest to access, and that is on Showtime starting tonight on their cable network, starting tonight, and it will go for a few days, and then it will be a little broader, and it's on their app as well. And then eventually by January, I think it'll be in a broader spectrum where you can get it through Amazon. And I can't say for sure, but I know that there are more platforms are coming.
Excellent.
In other words, we got out, and that's a big miracle for me because
I know
we didn't get any cooperation from any American distribution outlet except Showtime.
Yeah, I want to ask you about that later on.
I'm grateful to Showtime.
Yeah.
At the same time, I have to say no American entity was willing to finance this documentary. We had to go to England to get it financed, and it was done by financed by Ingenious, and it's being distributed worldwide by a company called Altitude, and they're doing a good job of getting it out there. We went to the Cannes Festival, we went to the Deauville, we went to Rome Festival, and we got quite a bit of acclaim. And for that reason, it's good. But
yeah,
in the United States, it's hard to hear about it. When it comes to the Kennedy killing, there's a I would say close to a media blackout on any free thought in that regard. So
Yeah, I want
we're
to ask you
trying,
about that.
we're trying, and this is a very important film. It's a factual one. It
Mm.
deals with some of the all the dramatizations I did back in '91. I tried to get attention to the film by making it an exciting thriller, which I think it was. And now, in 30 years later, I want to set the record as best as I can from what I know, straight for the American people. And I think you can reference this film in years to come as to where the state of investigation was.
Yeah, it's among the important documents unwrapping the events of that time. Definitely, for sure. What again, I read it as a sequel or half of it, the second half of a diptych. What made you shift from a fictionalized treatment? I love the first film to a documentary. What was
So I
behind
wouldn't
that?
call it fiction for some reason. I'd call it dramatization.
Fair
No,
enough.
you're
Yeah.
taking real characters and some cases condensing them, combining them. But there were no massive shifts in the story. It was basically the story as it had been reported or unreported. But anyway, we went deeper. So it wasn't fiction. It was a drama.
Fair enough. Yeah.
That's what I'd say. But anyway, the difference is that this is fact. This is fact, and you can dispute, and we can go into footnotes and footnotes and footnotes, but this is really good stuff. This came from many different people through many years.
Yeah. Yeah.
The why I've been doing documentaries, I've done 9 of them now. I've done Castro and Chavez, and south of the border, I did Putin. I'm doing a lot of different things that are of interest to me to know about the world.
Yeah.
Whereas a fiction film, a drama film can take a year or more to make. Sometimes a documentary can cut through faster.
There was an enormous amount of research into this, the new one, right?
And I
That's
have to
played,
credit
right?
James D. Eugenio is the writer of the script, and he is an assassination researcher, second generation, a man who remembers everything he reads, which is quite remarkable, considering I forget so much.
What conclusions did you come to? I was watching with particular care because I'm a great fan of David Talbot's book,
Oh, good.
Devil's Chessboard. And I remember speaking to him very briefly at the time. And about this, and he kind of walked right up to the door of Alan Dulles' house in Georgetown, but he didn't walk through it. One must be responsible. I'm not writing about it, so I can say openly, I'm rather certain Alan Dulles was the prime mover here. What conclusions did you draw? You seem to do the same thing, right up to Dulles, but I think probably responsibly,
Yeah, no, this is factual. No, I think now I'm in the area of what I think as opposed to what I know. I do think after all this time with it and intuition that it goes beyond Dulles. It's higher than I think Dulles was a manager, probably the manager, because he had all access to the agency. He was still a very powerful man. He was in Washington. He was buzzing around the whole scene. All these people that show up or in some way or other worked for him at one point or another, including the counterterrorism chief, James Angleton, who kept a record of Oswald's existence for 4 years and rerouted it from a 201 into some kind of file that disappeared. It's still there, maybe the file, we don't know. But Dulles, yes, but I think he had to get permission from a higher ups somebody in the East Coast financial structure.
Interesting.
Maybe Rockefellers have done so much evil to this country. I certainly would not put it beyond their capacity to have participated, because Kennedy was dangerous to business.
Yeah,
dangerous to business, and they knew it. And what they feared the most was his reelection in '64, because they feared a Roosevelt-type dynasty. 4 terms, the concept of Kennedy being with us for 4 terms, including Robert and maybe Teddy. My God, it's terrifying to these
Yeah,
guys.
yeah, I see.
60 more years of Roosevelt, and that's the way I see it. And I
Mhm.
think they knew it, that if he got reelected, they were dead in the water because he'd have more power.
Yeah,
Second president has more power.
that's a fascinating
The,
conclusion, if even if tentative. What more is to come? I think I read recently that Biden has just delayed some scheduled release of more documents.
yeah,
Can you speculate what might be in them, or more generally, what more
there
is
were
to come?
20,000 20,000 some documents that we know of. Of course, we don't. There are things we may not know of. 20,000 documents is a lot, and the law specified that they're coming out. He voted for it back when in 92. He voted
Yeah,
for it. So I'm disappointed. He's an Irish Catholic, for Christ's sake. He comes from Kennedy's blood. He should be loyal to this man. Kennedy was a rebel. I mean, Irish rebels, and I like Biden in a way. I really, he's aged, he's mellowed, he's like a fine wine. I'm glad he pulled out of Afghanistan. I think he's been steady at a time of a storm. So he's steady at the tiller, and I think that's important for this country. Why he's so hated for that, it's funny how this American thing never ends. And whenever we go to war, they're happy. Whenever we withdraw from war, they hate it. They hate him. And the military industrial, again, has been against this withdrawal, and all these generals are saying the same thing. It was a mess. How do you get out of a war? It's not that simple
yeah,
once you start them, and Kennedy knew that. So I'm disappointed in Joe because he's breaking the law. Yes,
he is. Interesting.
he is breaking the law. Yeah, it's a mandate. You've got to release it. He's been delaying it,
Hmm.
and the reason is COVID. Is that the reason? He
Oh,
gave bullshit.
yeah, of course.
How does COVID delay this document? This is nonsense. It's 60 years of this nonsense. I'm not saying we're going to learn everything, but we could learn a few more things. Yeah, I'd like to see a CIA file on Harvey and David Atlee Phillips. I'd like to see a file on George Joannides. Of course, I'd like to see that. I'd like to see a file on Dulles himself, but I doubt that that would be available.
Yeah,
But
yeah. Interesting.
and Richard Helms, by the way, let's not let Richard Helms off the hook because he took over the CIA. He was number two.
Yeah.
McCone was a straw man, really.
He followed. Did he follow directly after Dulles was fired, or
Helms McCone took over.
McCone? That's right.
And then
Helms.
there may have been somebody in between, but it wouldn't have mattered. Helms was running the agency, so to speak, and knew where all the skeletons were buried. He attacked us heavily when we brought the film out.
You lead me to my question about Kennedy here. There's extraordinary footage in the new film of Kennedy giving a speech on foreign policy where he favors normalizing with Cuba, a détente with Russia, coexistence of one or another sort, withdraw from Vietnam. I found it quite amazing. It was a rather anti-imperial foreign policy speech without ever using the term, right? And that was the fall of '63, I had to note. And I wondered what your take on Kennedy is, because my understanding was he came to office as quite a vigorous Cold Warrior. And indeed, there's footage in Nixon on a TV screen where he doesn't sound like that at all, right? His big thing about freedom and we're the last defenders and so forth. I wondered what you thought was on Kennedy, right?
That's absolutely true. And of course, this is a big bone of contention. A lot of the liberals, the Noam Chomsky, of course, deride Kennedy as another Cold Warrior. And what's the difference? Johnson takes over. There's no break between Kennedy and Johnson. The old regime goes on. And a lot of leftists, people who I admire for other reasons, have hewed to that line and never come off it. And I don't know why, because there is a lot of new research, and because of the declassifications, we know a lot more about what Kennedy was thinking. He was playing a double game. Yes, he came in. He had to. No one could have been elected no one could have been elected. Henry Wallace got buried in 1948.
Yeah.
You couldn't possibly be for peace. Adlai Stevenson, who was a liberal, a relative liberal in the 50s, got buried by Eisenhower twice. So in this election, Kennedy had to at least pay his due to the Cold War complex, which was, we have to be strong, the Russians against the Russians. And that was without fail. Cuba was part of that problem. So he had to go along. But when he got into office, he found out, what did he find out right away, first few weeks with McNamara as the Secretary of Defense? That there was no missile gap, which is what he'd been saying. When he checked the numbers, actually, we were way ahead of the Soviets in everything, in weaponry. We were miles ahead of them, which is one of the reasons why we were so aggressive in that period, why the Joint Chiefs of Staff wanted to go to war over Cuba, why they were basically willing to go to war against Russia, against the Soviets. Because if we took them on now, their thinking was, it's better to deal with it now, because the Russians will only get stronger now. And over time it'll be, which is what happened. They did get stronger. They did build up by the time of the 70s. They started to build up big time because they were so scared of America. And they did. So it's like one thing creates the other, but essentially the American policy towards Soviet Union was so hostile that they were telling Kennedy, let's go. Let's attack Cuba. Let's go in 62. And to his great credit, he said no. And him and Khrushchev and Bobby Kennedy essentially brokered their way into a deal. It may not have been the neatest deal. It created a lot of enmity, but it was a deal by which the Soviets would take the missiles out of Cuba and we would take the missiles out of Turkey. They were aged missiles. But aside from that, I mean, we were at the edge of, you're old enough to know that what it was like at that time. And it was scary, those days.
Yeah.
It was truly the end of mankind. And we had gone through the Strange Love, and we saw the movie by Kubrick, and there was we saw On the Beach. We saw it was a doomsday mentality.
Yeah.
Kennedy brought us back, and then after that, he had a great period in the 63 when he had a détente going with Khrushchev. Together they made the nuclear test ban treaty, which was limited to atmospheric testing, but it was the first treaty ever between these two countries. It was the first treaty. It was just unbelievable that people don't recognize how important that was. He makes his peace speech, talks about a space cooperation with the Soviets. He talks to Castro through intermediaries, talks about détente with Castro. And above all, people attack me for this all the time, we now have more and more proof through declassified documents that he was pulling out of Vietnam. He said so. He said that the first 1,000 troops were coming out by the end of 63, and then the rest in 65. But McNamara validated what we were saying in his book after the movie came out. He said, win or lose, Kennedy was pulling out of Vietnam, win or lose.
Yeah.
This was seconded by his national security advisor, McGeorge Bundy, in his book.
There's some stills in the new film of Bobby and Jack looking at one another, and I suppose one might read this into it in the year 2021, but looking at those pictures, it's almost as if they were looking at one another and saying, my God, we're confronted with the deep state, right? The power of Intel, the Pentagon, and the whole nine, right?
They were up against it, absolutely.
Was that something they discovered once in office?
Yes.
It seems to me it was, right?
Kennedy's record in the Senate on colonial issues was totally anti-colonial. On Algeria, he gave one of the strongest speeches, and he was condemned for it. He was a bit controversial in 1957. And he went to Vietnam in the early 50s. He was against the French experience in Indochina. He was warning. He was very concerned about Africa, and was shocked when Lumumba was killed, and tried to broker a peace with Dag Hammarskjöld in the Congo. Made a real effort. Really cared about it. And Indonesia, he was good, friendly with Sukarno. All these people were turned upon by us the moment he was killed. And Lyndon Johnson broke, except for civil rights, Lyndon Johnson essentially terminated all the Kennedy policies. I think this is a picture you're talking about, and it comes as the cover of a book
Uh,
that David Talbot wrote called Brothers, which is a very important document that you read this because you mentioned that his Devil's Chessboard, which is more about the Dulles brothers. This book is about the two brothers, and it's great. It's a great book.
Interesting. The opening sequence of the new film is Kennedy's peace speech, as you just named it. And I couldn't help thinking whether you were suggesting there that the assassinations were a moment of real world historical importance, as if to say, a world of a different kind was right before us within our grip, and we lost it. I wondered what you think of it. This is one of the questions that prompted me to ask for some of your time, Oliver, right? Because I think that you're much more qualified to weigh in on the topic, but I think that November 22nd, 58 years ago, was a moment from which we have never recovered, and we still live with the consequences. Are you on for that?
I'm totally in agreement with you. I think if he had not been killed, there would have been a detente. We would have ended the Cold War much sooner. We would have allocated our resources completely differently. I think there would have been no Vietnam War to drain our resources like it did, and the continuation of the wars, the mentality. That's what's wrong. The mentality had to be changed. We had to move away from terror, the terror of our enemies, which had been instilled in us by media and by the military-industrial lobbies. Always scariness, terrifying the American people. We've lived in a state of terror since World War II because of this. It never stopped. It's been an economic decision, if anything, to keep that sense of emergency on the American people's mind in order to pay for all these inflated programs.
And we could have got past it if he had remained.
We had to have an example, and he would have you have to have an example of a calm leader who is for peace, who's saying, I'm for peace, and is actually doing something about it. No one has ever really made a speech in my recent memory, talking about peace. Really,
you can't.
I haven't heard one.
Yeah.
It's all been small time stuff and basically defending the military and defending its intelligence agencies, which is a shame. He was limited in his power. Those two agencies, the military and the intelligence agencies, had their own autonomy. They had grown accustomed to their autonomy after World War II under Eisenhower.
Right. And by that time it was.
And that was a key moment. To cut them off and change the nature. Now it's perhaps too late. It's just so much. They're so stratified. How big are they? They have the Pentagon represents the size of this thing, and the CIA too.
We touched on this earlier, but let me go over it again. Can you remind us of the critical reception of the original JFK, and what has been the fate of the film so far? It's my understanding was it's some way in the direction of canceled or something. Well, cancel culture. It's been blacked out. I mean, how tough has it been to?
That's one way of putting it.
Yeah.
It's hard to say. I mean, I'm very proud of the film. It came out. It made money all over the world. It was very respected. Oscar nominations, almost won Best Picture. But obviously it was controversial. And
you mean the first one? The first one.
Oh, is that what you're talking about? Oh, you're talking about this one. Oh, I'm sorry. This one is a documentary. I did not have the same hopes for it. It was a documentary, has a limited appeal, but it definitely has hit a black hole in America. There's no mention of it in major media, barely. And it's on, at least we got as I said, we have a distribution. Sorry, where are you? Okay, are you here?
Yep.
Oh, okay. I guess I lost you here. I'm trying to find you back. Oh, shoot. Okay. Well, anyway,
I'm here. Count on it.
I know.
And you're recording, so you're good.
Yeah. For some reason, I can't get you back. Hold on, please. Just a sec. Trying to, I can't get back. I'm going to try to get back in through my Zoom link again. I have to leave soon because we've been talking for at least 30 minutes, I think.
All right.
Can you let me in? Can you look again? Launch
Do
the
I have
meeting?
to do something here? Let's see.
Sorry.
Only one more question, if you
Yeah.
could bear not looking at me.
Okay.
Right. I want to ask to introduce the question. I want to quote from 4th of July. Kovic is
Ron Kovic.
is talking to his compadre Charlie, I think his name is, the Willem Dafoe character.
Yes.
And they've just had their knockdown drag out in the Mexican desert.
Yes.
And Kovic says, do you remember things that made sense before we all got so lost? It's a very powerful line. Really has echoed with me ever since I saw the film. And I'm wondering whether it suggests to you, as it did to me, the sort of psychological dimension of America, of the American fate since the assassinations in the Vietnam War. And I wondered whether what your take is on the current American condition, let's say, whether you could think of us as a lost people in consequence of the things that have preoccupied you, even, right?
That's a tough one to answer, Patrick. Certainly that represented Ron Kovic's point of view. And you could say that after those people who came back from that war did feel dislocated. I was one of them. We consider we were lost in the same way that people who came back from World War I were called the lost generation.
Mm-hmm.
We were far fewer. And most Americans didn't serve over there. But that war was so un-American a war. It was so strange because we were so brutal and we bombed incredibly in volume alone, more than World War II. It suggests a genocidal campaign. We also used napalm and we used Agent Orange and we used biological agents. We had assassinations against the Vietnamese. We also killed civilians, and above all, we lied. We lied about the war and what we did. And so all those things come home to roost, is what Malcolm X said. It would, I don't see how the karma, if you believe in spiritual dimension, I don't see how we can go and do that and not suffer consequences. And yet we bounce around and everything, the economy recovers, nobody remembers, and we go to another cycle, and then we go to another war and another war and another war. And we're very resilient, but where is our humanity? Don't we think that there are casualties here? Don't we remember? Do we think that people are unaffected because they don't drop bombs on here in the United States? When it happened in 2001, people acted so shocked, as if, wow, how can they do this? It became the greatest story for our media ever. It was as if we were immune from history. But I don't see, I'm not surprised. I'm surprised that we have that. I'm surprised that we're surprised. I don't know where we're going, but it seems like our karma is so fucked.
Yeah.
It's so fucked. I would say Dante would write us into the last circle of hell, but the lowest one. I hope for our country. I'm an optimist that we overcome this, but it's frightening to think the things we've done.
We ought to count ourselves among the casualties, right? In another sort of way,
Well, you're only a casualty insofar as you forget.
Yeah.
And if you remember, you're alive, and
Yeah.
you're no longer a casualty because you're carrying forth a fight, a crusade, not to forget. You're making people remember the Vietnam War. I may get on television and people say, "Oh, him again," Vietnam War, blah blah blah. Well, too bad,
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
that's the truth. You can't forget it.
Oliver Stone's new film, JFK Revisited, subtitled Through the Looking Glass. Oliver, immense thanks for sharing some time with us.
Thank you.
We're
I'm
very,
sorry
very grateful.
I can't see you, Patrick, but thanks.
Okay.
Talk to you soon, I hope.